welcome to JS on Politics. I'm your host, Greg Borowski. We apologize for the delays. We've been recounting our script here and trying to get it in the proper order. Let me give you a quick rundown on what's ahead on our show. The election is not over until the last ballot is counted and recounted. Will it make any difference? Donald Trump has begun filling out his cabinet. Does it look like a team of insurgents? And will Milwaukee County Sheriff David A. Clarke Jr. get a role? We'll take a look at a special report from this week examining the impact of Act 10 5 years later. As always, we'll give you our winners and losers from the past week, and we'll tackle some viewer questions. Well, let's start with the recount. So I'm joined here in the studio by Dan Bice and Mary Spicuzza, and we're joined from Madison by Jason Stein, one of our Madison Bureau reporters. So Jason, tell us what this recount looks like now that it's finally underway.
Right, so it got started this morning. Jill Stein, who is no relation to me, I might add, paid $3.5 million to get that recount started this morning. And basically around Wisconsin in our 72 counties, canvassing boards are going through a process of recounting ballots and doing a number of other things, reconciling poll books, testing vote counting machines that sort of go with the process of retallying nearly 3 million votes.
And let's talk, Dan and Mary, to remind our viewers about the genesis of this. So Jill Stein, who got a very small percentage of the vote in Wisconsin, requested it in only 3 states, which if they all happen to flip,
right,
Hillary Clinton would change the electoral outcome.
States being Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania.
Yeah. So is her motivation to deny Trump the win? Is it to get the accurate count? Is it to help Hillary Clinton? What's behind this, do you think?
I think it depends who you ask. Jill Stein has said this is just about integrity of the election system and making sure every vote is counted and every vote is counted accurately.
But I don't think most people believe that.
Right, and I think the Donald Trump supporters would say that she's trying to steal his win away and rig the vote after the fact. Hillary Clinton did not obviously request the recount, but she's now participating. I'm sure she would be happy if these votes flipped the other way. But it would be a pretty surprising number to have that many votes. 22,000.
Yeah, in the state, Trump won by 22,000 votes. Jill Stein got about 30,000 votes. So, I mean, if she really wanted to affect the outcome of the race, she could have dealt with that a number of months ago as to whether she got in or not. But yeah, these recounts usually don't. I mean, the amazing thing about every election night, I have this response. You know, the election polls close, and like 2 hours later, we know who won. And it's crazy. CNN came under criticism that it took them 6 hours after the polls closed to finally call for Trump. And to have 100 and some million votes, you know, counted, it's pretty amazing that we get the results as quickly as we do. And so when you do a recount, you are going to find problems. There are going to be a few numbers that are off. I've never had a recount in which there weren't some numbers that were off, but it's usually a very small number.
I think the state Supreme Court was 300 maybe,
yeah,
or so.
Right.
So Jason, I mean, what's your sense of? I mean, what are the odds if someone were a betting person that there would be some 22,000? There'd have to be some either massively obvious thing that was ignored, or some computer hacking, or what's the theory here as to where we would think there would be 22,000 votes? So not even just being off, but off in Donald Trump's favor.
Here's the. Or you're saying off in
you could have a miscount.
Here's the bottom line.
All favor one side.
Here's the bottom line. If this recount goes as other recounts nationally typically go, and as our state Supreme Court recount went in 2011, there's not going to be a change in the outcome. There would need to be something pretty unprecedented and surprising, like huge numbers of ballots that had been forgotten and not counted.
Which has happened before.
It did happen. It did happen in 2011. We did see that some ballots, but those ballots also were found pretty quickly, or I should say actually that they were not. There were some numbers that were not included in the unofficial tally that happened on election night in 2011 for Supreme Court, and then basically a day later, I think that inaccurate tally was resolved. But again, in that statewide recount that resulted there were about 1.5 million votes and about 300 vote margin change. All right. And so now we have about twice that number of votes cast, but you would need to have a 22,000 vote margin change. And so it's just really unlikely to happen.
All right, so is there anything to be gleaned from this, guys, in terms of once it's done, and it will tell us about how strong and accurate our election tallying is, or what? Or is this just going to be an exercise for a few weeks of suspense that's not really suspenseful?
I think we're all curious to see what it's going to be, but I don't know of anybody who's expecting it to flip the state.
Yeah, I think by the time January rolls around, it'll be probably almost forgotten. But I mean, there will be some differences. Instead of winning by 22,000, he probably will end up winning by 21,700 or 22,300. There will be some. I mean, there are usually some numbers that are slightly off, but yeah, I mean, it's an interesting exercise. But I think it won't amount to anything in terms of the outcome.
All right, well, we'll end our discussion there on the recount and go now to a segment that looks at some recent PolitiFact ratings on claims about the election outcome. We're joined now by Tom Kircher, one of our PolitiFact Wisconsin reporters, to take a look at some of the fact checks that have been done on all these election-related, recount-related claims. So, Tom, let's go with the first one here. It's just from Jill Stein, the Green Party nominee, who's requested the recount in Wisconsin, and her claim was Wisconsin uses voting machines that are outlawed, they are illegal, and our rating on that was pants on fire.
Yeah, her claim makes it sound as though Wisconsin actually flouted the law while conducting an election, but her reference was to certain machines in California that were banned. But states decide what's legal and not legal in terms of the voting machines, and all the machines in Wisconsin, whether they're the paper style or the touchscreen, are approved by the State Election Commission.
All right, our next claim is from President-elect Donald Trump himself, who says he, quote, won the popular vote if you deduct the millions of people who voted illegally, and that, too, is rated pants on fire.
Just no evidence for that. Trump himself has not cited any evidence. People who back him have not. If anything, studies have shown that the level of illegal voting or fraudulent voting is so small that it couldn't possibly account for millions of votes.
Yeah, and the gap, Hillary Clinton was ahead by 2 million plus, so that's
right.
a lot of millions.
Right.
To make away. Another one from Donald Trump, who says there was, quote, serious voter fraud, end quote, in New Hampshire. That was a state that Hillary Clinton won, and that was rated pants on fire.
Same problem here. He's making a statement without any evidence to back it up. In New Hampshire, there were more than 700,000 ballots cast and not even one complaint about a fraudulent vote.
All right, and finally, this last claim was made by bloggers and a variety of folks out there. There was Harambe, that's the gorilla from Cincinnati, received 15,000 votes in the presidential election. And probably no surprise here, that was rated pants on fire.
Yeah. Most of those statements were made the day after the election before any write-in votes could have even been counted. The idea that there could be 15,000, just not possible given that most states require you have to be a registered write-in candidate, and some states don't even allow write-in candidates.
All right, and we don't assume that the gorilla, who's no longer with us,
That's right.
was written in as a candidate.
Right.
All right, so thanks, Tom, for sharing those with us. We'll have you back in the future to talk about more PolitiFact ratings.
Great.
So that ends our segments today on the recount, but we're going to shift now to some other national issues in Donald Trump's cabinet. In this segment, I'll take a look at who some of the early selections are. We're joined now by Craig Gobert, our Washington bureau chief, to talk about how President-elect Donald Trump is filling out his cabinet. So, Craig, every day it seems there's this parade of folks into Trump Tower and out of Trump Tower and the occasional appointment that comes through. Talk a little bit about the process that Donald Trump is going through here and how that compares to what might have been done under Barack Obama or past presidents.
So it is more of a spectacle. I think that's true, and that's not surprising in keeping with the Trump campaign. It's also so you've got the spectacle of people traveling to New York to meet with him. A lot of them are prospective appointees. You had the spectacle of him having dinner with Mitt Romney and Reince Priebus to discuss Romney's possible future as a Secretary of State. And you've also got the spectacle of people within the Trump circle sending out competing messages about some of these appointments, particularly Romney, who's been criticized by Kellyanne Conway, who ran Trump's campaign, for his criticisms, his very harsh criticisms of Trump during the campaign. And finally, you've got the spectacle of Trump kind of reemerging on Twitter, the reactive Trump that we've seen in the past when the recount started in Wisconsin or was looming in Wisconsin. he put out a tweet that created a storm of controversy where he claimed without any basis, in fact, that there were millions of fraudulent votes that robbed him of the popular vote majority.
Yeah, so let's talk about, as you mentioned Mitt Romney, there's a lot of the names that we're seeing as selections are familiar names, right? Is there any irony there with this insurgent candidacy, and then you're seeing, past cabinet picks like Elaine Chao and others?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a shock. I mean, this is a Republican administration that'll be working with a Republican Congress. There were disagreements certainly over a bunch of issues, and Donald Trump was certainly not an orthodox Republican, but there's a lot of common ground there too. And you have to. There hasn't been a Republican president in 8 years. There's a limited pool of people who've served in Republican administrations. And so that's one reason why we're seeing and we're going to see more kind of old hands. I mean, it is interesting when you have Trump having run a very populist outsider campaign, drawing on some familiar faces and also drawing on some people from the world of finance and Wall Street. He was a critic of Wall Street certainly during the campaign. But again, I'm not sure too many voters will be shocked when he taps people who are going to give him conservative economic advice.
Yeah, so of the positions named so far, are there any that stand out to you as the biggest surprise or the one that might have the most controversy among senators when they go for confirmation?
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly, in the driver's seat because of the Republican majority in the Senate, but he doesn't have a lot of votes to spare. And there could be, I'm sure there is going to be 2 or 3, if not more, confirmation hearings and processes that will be stormy. For example, Jeff Sessions, while he's going to be going before his own colleagues to be confirmed for Attorney General, has a pretty controversial past. He said some things that have raised eyebrows, and he's going to be really harshly questioned, I think, by Democrats. And there could be a few Republicans on some of these appointees who either are coming up for re-election in 2 years or who just have a different politics than Donald Trump, who may gum up the works. I don't think we're going to see it on a wholesale level, but I think there will be a few that are really contested.
All right, and finally, you have a piece coming up this weekend where you dug in a little deeper on the election results and where Donald Trump did best and worst compared to Mitt Romney. Why don't you describe a little bit about what you found?
Yeah, I mean, I went down to the local level, to the 1,800 plus villages, towns, and cities in Wisconsin to see how they voted in 2012, how they voted in 2016 for president, and what the shifts were between those two elections. And of course, most of the state shifted in a Republican direction. Donald Trump outperformed Mitt Romney by a lot in lots of small communities in northern and western Wisconsin. I mean, just really small places, 200 or 300 people, where the swings were just massive. I mean, from a 20 or 30 point Obama victory to a 20 or 30 point Trump victory. And those numbers really added up. And it's just as interesting to see the places where Trump really underperformed Mitt Romney. The most affluent communities in the state, I mean, most of them in metropolitan Milwaukee, but places like Whitefish Bay and Elm Grove and River Hills and Mequon, that in some cases still voted for Trump, but by much smaller margins than they voted for Romney, and in some cases flipped from red to blue.
All right, well, that'll be something to look forward to on jsonline.com in the coming days, and I'm sure we'll have you back in the coming weeks, Craig, as we see the cabinet filled out and have more to update from Washington. So thanks for joining us.
Great.
All right, we're back and wanted to talk about one of the particular people up for a cabinet job of
Our
local
favorite
interest,
person.
our favorite person on a frequent discussion point on this show, Sheriff David Clarke. So he met with Donald Trump and his team on Monday.
Right.
It's now Thursday. What have we heard about what was discussed?
It appears he was in there for about an hour from people around him and his allies. They say it went pretty well. It's apparently you go in and do sort of a presentation of what you could do or how you could help the administration. From what I understand, the conversation was focused almost exclusively on the Department of Homeland Security, which is a massive job, 240,000 employees, more than a dozen agencies, and Clarke has written about his plans, what he would do if he would go there. But and I've written this, that he might have some interest in something else, not just that, because that's mainly an administrative job, and he wants something that might be more focused on policy. So something like the National Security Council or something like that. But they're very optimistic, and everyone's expecting, Trump to make his announcements on this sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, what other positions though do you think would be in line for David Clarke? A lot of people would probably say, well, he's not even qualified for the first one they're talking about.
Well, it is
such a huge jump.
It is a big jump. His agency has 618 employees and 207, including 271 deputies. The Department of Homeland Security is 400 times bigger than that. And from what I understand, Clarke has talked to former Governor Tommy Thompson about what is involved in running a cabinet level post, and it is, a number of hours, and it's putting out a lot of fires because you have I was just looking through the various agencies under Department of Homeland Security, everything from the Secret Service to, any number of other things. So you're overseeing all of these things, and so administration's not been a big thing for him. He's very much more interested in according to his book, in changing the way that we combat terrorism in America. So
what kind of, for viewers, what kind of scrutiny do you think, if say he is nominated, is he going to get at the Senate level or from the media and the attention? This is a whole different league to go from Milwaukee County Sheriff to that. What do you think, Mary?
Yeah, I would think that the recent deaths at the jail would come up. That is under him, and he said he takes responsibility for the jail. So the dehydration of an inmate, the newborn baby, or whether it was stillborn or newborn and then died, but apparently people didn't know that she was in labor. I would think that all those things would come up either through Trump and his vetting team or through the confirmation process.
I think his administration of the jail would be big, and also he had the correction facility as well, and that didn't go so well. I think his authoritarian style would be something that has come up again and again from the very beginning, where if he didn't like you, he'd put you on the street and make you act like a regular street cop. And three would be his incendiary rhetoric, everything from saying that Chris Abele has penis envy to saying it's pitchfork and torches time in America. I think those would probably be the areas that people would look at.
So if you look at the cabinet appointments, there's sort of seems to be this tension and pull between who are the loyalists to Trump and who are sort of maybe more of the party regulars. You have.
It's personified by
Reince,
who represents the traditional conservatives, and Bannon, who represents the less traditional and the less traditional coalition, the working class members of the party. And from what I understand, Sheriff Clarke has a much better relationship with Steve Bannon than he does with Reince Priebus. And so, and he is up against some heavy hitters. Fran Townsend's a major player, McCauley another major player. So, it'll be interesting to see how it turns out. But I was told this week that he's been informed that there's a 100% chance he'll be offered some position in the administration.
He's definitely been loyal. I mean, he's been on the Trump train longer than just about anybody in Wisconsin that I can think of.
Actually, I think Fitzgerald was on sooner.
Oh, that's true, Scott Fitzgerald.
In the primary, he refused to tell us who he voted for. I asked him specifically, did you vote for Cruz or did you vote for Trump? And he said, I'm not going to tell you. But then about a month later, then he came out full board. But since he's been out, since he's been on board with Trump, he's been the strongest advocate. And another issue that's a part of this is, from what I understand, there aren't very many minorities under consideration for cabinet posts. And so as an African American who's under consideration, it would be a positive for the administration to have him on the team.
All right, we will leave that discussion there and turn now to a segment that looks at a special report we had in the newspaper and online this week, looking at 5 years since the passage of Act 10. We're joined now by Dave Umhafer, one of our reporters here at the Journal Sentinel, who has spent a lot of time over the past many months looking at Act 10, 5 years later, already on the show earlier this summer and fall about how the impact on the classroom was. You did a piece this week on unions, which was obviously the key target of Act 10. Can you describe a little bit about what has the impact been for unions now 5 years after Act 10 was passed?
Sure. I mean, by the numbers, just in terms of membership decline, it's been pretty dramatic. 50, 60, 70% declines for teachers' unions, AFSCME, the big municipal government union. And it shows up for one thing, in campaigns, you may have noticed fewer flyers from the unions in your mailbox this time around. They're still spending quite heavily, especially if you look back at the recall from 2012, the recall elections. But it's definitely diminished, and it looks like it'll probably continue to go down, so that sort of counterweight to corporate spending is been diminished.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the themes of this story seemed to be that over time, this pendulum has swung back and forth a little bit in terms of who's been in power in Madison.
Right.
When Democrats were there before 2010, they gave unions much of what they wanted, and then they lost it again. But talk a little bit about that dynamic there of how they got us where we are.
Amazing how much politics there is in just setting the compensation for teachers. Direct sort of intervention over the years, over the decades, in how much their pay increases can be, the cost of benefits, and so forth. And we'd see teacher salaries surge into the top 15 nationally, and then Madison would kind of slow school spending down, typically under Republicans, and you'd see it. Salaries would drop down below the national average. So there's been this sort of pendulum, and the unions. It's sort of a case of living by the sword and dying by the sword. They got so active in politics that when the other side would gain advantage, there was real risk, and they really got
one of the striking things to me, anyways, was that there were many union leaders and former leaders who were saying, look, maybe we didn't factor some of this in, or we went too far one way, and it was destined to come back in the other way.
I think complacency can set in. They were successful over the years in getting such strong contracts, and they kind of coasted along and didn't really see this coming, probably like they should have. I think some of the complaints now, looking back, are a little bit in hindsight, but there's plenty of people in the union movement who said, we kind of rested on our laurels after a while. Yeah,
we have another piece that's sort of a companion piece to that, a 6-part series that continues today and finishes tomorrow on Scott Walker and his time at Milwaukee County and his battles with AFSCME and the unions here. So describe a little bit about why you wanted to include that story and how that approach helps provide context.
Well, I covered the governor when he was county executive in Milwaukee for 5 years, and I think if Act 10, if you just started following that issue when the protests hit and he introduced it, you might say, where did this come from? I think a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it came from his experience with the unions in Milwaukee County, where he came in, wanted to make big changes right away, and was pretty handicapped because AFSCME was super powerful. So we write about, in the series, about their clashes over the years and how he really got more and more frustrated and started to go around them when he could, and it was real chaos and real animosity built up. And he says, and I think a lot of it is true, that he was just champing at the bit when he got to Madison to try to really eliminate them from the process and eliminate collective bargaining so that he could make swift changes.
Yeah. Lastly, tell us a little bit, what's the reaction been to this round of stories? You're hearing from readers or subjects of the story about what you wrote?
Well, one thing I want to mention is that surprised me was I'm hearing from a fair number of people who say Act 10 was so divisive in my family that these stories are really difficult to them to read and go back through this time period. And I'm telling them, history is important and we need to learn from this. Why did it happen? There's, I think, a fair amount of interest in the stories, even though people know the ending. It's kind of helps fill in the blanks about Governor Walker, his motivations, and why this sort of blew up out of nowhere in 2011.
So I've only read through the first few parts. Act 10 passes, not? Yeah, I'm just kidding.
Right. I thought about doing an alternate history version. We should do a part 7 that has some different ways this could have gone.
But we're not into the fake news here at the Journal Sentinel. So, all right, so you can find those stories at jsonline.com/Act10. And again, Chapter 5 of the Walker piece runs today, and Chapter 6 runs on Friday. So I hope you check those out. All right, we're back with Dan and Mary for our winners and losers segment. Mary, we're going to go to you first for your winner of the week.
Okay, I think I'm going to go with Paul Ryan for winner of the week. Obviously, before the election, there was a lot of speculation that if Trump lost, there might be an effort for a coup attempt. Instead, he coasts through. Now he's on the radio when hosts remember to pick him up because there was somebody who forgot it was on the line this week. That aside, though, he was talking about, he's actually getting questions about his Better Way plan now after months of trying to talk about it and just being asked about Trump and the campaign. And it's funny because it has provisions for things like health care and high-risk pools and things that we weren't really talking about.
The blueprint for what
Correct.
Trump is wanting to
We're all going to have to read up on it now because a lot of people were not reading it.
All right.
Well, actually, according to that New York Times story, he went into the plan and like 5 minutes into it, Trump said, yeah, okay, whatever.
Sounds good.
Paul from Janesville.
Paul from Janesville is my winner,
And
calling
Dan, who's
in.
your winner of the week?
Mine's Governor Walker. He started 2016 with a huge debt, and he's knocked it down to $300 and some thousand that he has as a debt from his failed presidential bid. And then we found out this week that he had a very hoity-toity fundraiser at the Hunt and Fish Club in New York City with hedge fund managers and so forth, and then Vice President Pence shows up at the event too. And from what I'm told, they're online to get rid of this debt by the end of the year. So.
All right. And Dan, your loser of the week.
My loser of the week was President-elect Trump. While we're having this recount here, he decided to start tweeting about the fact that there were a lot of illegal immigrants who voted and that he actually would have won the popular vote if you took away all of those votes, which is ridiculous, and there's no proof of this whatsoever.
Millions of illegal votes,
Yeah.
right.
Right. And Mary, your loser of the week.
I think it's got to be Mitt Romney, although he could still get a cabinet position. These photos of him having these meetings with Trump and their dinner at the restaurant at Trump Tower just kind of looked agonizing. And here's somebody who, just really tried to block Trump every step of the way and who Trump really belittled as a, choker and
Do you think
loser.
Trump would make him apologize?
I don't know. It seems like there would have to be some kind of ring kissing going on for him to get a position. But there was some of the photos. He just kind of had like an agonized look on his face, which obviously can just be a camera shot, but it did not look fun.
If you do that and you get to be Secretary of State, we'll be back next week to make
right.
him a
Then he
winner,
could be a
probably.
winner, right? Although then if you do that and then you don't get a position or you don't get the
Then
position you
you
want,
gotta-
then you're like a
you're more of a
double
loser or
loser,
something.
right?
Okay, we'll
So yeah,
check back
he's
next
tentative loser, but could flip.
All right, so let's take a couple of viewer questions. This first one is from Question Mark, who says, why isn't Scott Walker in the running for a cabinet post or the other unsuccessful candidates? Does Scott Walker just not want a position? Could he get one if he wanted
that,
one?
I don't know if he'd get one if he wanted one, but he stated very much out front that he didn't want one, that he was happy where he was and that he was not interested. There was some talk, but it was just mainly talk, that he could be a good labor secretary given his role with unions here. But I think he stated pretty strongly that he didn't want a position. Besides that, he and Trump don't have a good relationship. They've not had a good relationship ever since, even when they were running against each other, and then when Walker endorsed Cruz in the primary here.
Yeah, all right, and I'm going to throw this one to you, Mary, from Madtown Man, who says, if Trump is so good at saving jobs, when can he come to Wisconsin and help Scott Walker fulfill his promise of 250,000 new jobs? So this is referring to that carrier deal in Indiana.
Right, which was a huge tax break, apparently, that the Indiana is giving them, $7 million in tax breaks to stay. So that's actually getting it's funny because it's, I think Paul Ryan said, it's darn good that people are keeping their jobs, but I do think they're getting criticism from basically, do you just shell out a bunch of tax break money to get companies that want to leave?
But he should be careful what he's asking for, because right now they're trying to figure out where to go on their little victory tour Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and they're going to Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and there's talk maybe that they could come to Milwaukee if they can get the logistics worked out.
So maybe he'll be here soon.
And last question for this one to you, Dan. This is from Cheryl, who says, do you think Jill Stein is getting money from the Hillary campaign? This would relate to the recount. Or where's her money coming from?
It's from donors, but I wouldn't be surprised if Hillary donors are giving money to Jill Stein to help fund this thing. But she's not getting money directly from the
because that ultimately would have to be reported, and they wouldn't want to even engage in that. So.
But she did raise a lot of money very quickly, probably more than she did during the campaign.
All right, so we'll end our discussion there for today. We'll be back next week when that recount will probably still be going on, and we'll see about David Clarke. We'll see about Mary's pick on Mitt Romney where he winds up, and we hope you join us again next Thursday.